Hello and welcome back to the workshop, or actually I shouldn't call it that anymore. It is in fact the Munition und Feuerwaffen Neuinstandsetzung Büchsenmacherwerkstattzentrale Niederlassung Chapindorf, or MFNSBWTZNC for short. So what I'm going to do in this episode is show you a step-by-step way of reproducing rimfire cartridges. In this particular instance it is the mammoth 18mm Milbank-Amsler. So this is an original cartridge. This is the largest military rimfire case ever produced. And yeah, this thing you can't make nowadays. It also is quite peculiar in that the bottom half of the case of the bullet, including the bottom grease groove, so the original bullet profile is something like this. So it's just got one big band, call it a grease groove nowadays, and the case is swaged in to this groove here. Now it's easy to do, well, it was easy to do when you're dealing with a thin copper case as these are, but with a brass case you'd need specialist tools, and the brass would work hard and incredibly and would be blown out when you fire, so case life would be a real problem. So these cases take long enough to make that I really don't want to make them very often. So my solution is basically to leave off the sort of 5mm or so of the case that would be crimped in, and the result is an even stubbier little case. And the idea is that it'll look something like that when it's loaded. So the base of all this is going to be a MacTech 16 gauge solid head case, and the process in short is very easy. Plug the primer pocket. Now I started doing it by saying, I'll just silver solder the pocket, seal it shut. But then to do that I need to get the brass red hot for the solder to melt, which means it's then been annealed and there's butter soft, which is a bad thing when you're talking about a base of a case. So I went back to an old method that I used years ago, and simply I'm going to bore out the primer pocket slightly, tap it to M6, use an brass M6 screw with plenty of Loctite, screw it in, trim it all nicely, and then I will re-drill an eccentric primer pocket for a 6mm blank, which will be then the new ignition source for the rimfire case. Now when I posted pictures of these on Facebook, lots of people said, oh, how are you going to index it? Well, it's easy. You know where the striker strikes on the rim, and so when you would put the cartridge in, you just make sure your primer's lined up. It's a single shot, so you just have to pay attention. If it was a repeater, it would be annoying because obviously in the magazine cases can turn, so you're not necessarily guaranteed that it will line up with every cartridge. But single shot, and also just shooting on the range, there's no pressure, you just pay attention to what you're doing. And I am going to use the most basic of tools. So if you have a lathe, you can switch off now because it's going to be easy for you. However, us less so fortunate folk, all we really need is a pillar drill or column drill, and Dremel tool, that's quite handy, and otherwise it's hammers and files and that kind of thing, so common through every little workshop. Right, let's get on with it then. So first step is simply to drill out the primer pocket. I've got the drill bit all set up. I'm keeping the case long so I can have something to hold on to should I need to. Otherwise it's going to be really stubby and difficult. Now I don't want to scratch the outside, so what I have is part of a doorstop which I noticed was just the right diameter to hold the case. It just fits in there as if it was made for it. And I'm using other bits of this doorstop for other things for this case conversion, so this was actually a bit of luck. Anyway, I'll put this in the little vise and it'll hold it enough so it doesn't spin on itself. And what I'm going to do after that is already drill the center hole for the 6mm primer. And another bit of coincidence is on the back of this case, the 16 number, one of the ones on one side is exactly in the right place for the center of the new hole. So it's very convenient. I can just move the drill bit so that it lines up with that little number 1, and then I'll have the 2 holes exactly in the right place. So there we go, the 2 holes are drilled. Now I'm going to tap the centre one, and I'm just doing that by hand. And what I'll do is, again I said I need to have a good grip on it, and it's quite slippy. So what I found the best option was to grab a piece of latex. This is from one of these exercise band things, and just wrap it around the case, and then you got a nice grip. Got to tap it so it's more or less perpendicular. Don't want it too much on a wonk. This is where the latex comes into play. As soon as it really starts biting into the brass. You don't need to do it too much, just enough to thread the walls of the primer pocket. That's about enough. So next comes the screw and the Loctite. Now I use this screw, it does me for about 4 cartridges. So screw it in, trim it off, screw it in again, trim it off every time you do a cartridge. Plenty on there. And then you do a quick check inside just to see that it's level with the top of the primer pocket inside. It looks like there. And just let it set for a bit. So there you go, that's all plugged. Neat enough for what we want. So the next thing to do is going to grind out the rim for the rim of the 6mm cartridge. And for that I do have an end mill, 7mm diameter end mill, which I'm going to have to line up and hopefully cut out a neat rim around this primer hole. But for that I'm going to need to change the speed of my pillar drill, otherwise it's going to chatter like anything. Ask me how I know. So that's all the hard machining done. You can see there's the primer pocket now with a rim, and it's going to contain this tiny little cap. It's dimensions so that it's going to be an interference fit, so I'm going to have to press this in carefully, and hopefully there'll be going a gas blow by when it goes off. So I won't put this in now because I've still got some things to do where this can get a little bit hot, so best not to. Now the end mill is a special investment, but it's not strictly necessary. Up till now I've just used a 7mm drill bit, and that works fine. It does the same, just that here you have a nice little flat step in the chamber, effectively, instead of a bit of a cone. So now what I'm going to do is trim this down to size, and I will do this with the humble pipe cutter. So there we are, all trimmed off. That looks like inside. Now, because this is the base of the cartridge, the case walls are relatively thick, and that means it's too thick to chamber at the moment. So I need to thin down the outside of the case a little bit so that it chambers. Now, those who would have a lathe, you would chuck it up and carefully trim away. That's not an option for me, obviously. So I'm going back to my doorstop, which originally looked like this, with a bit at the back there. So this bit I cut off because I could use that as a case holder, and then I punched out the middle of the remaining disc, and that disc, that little plug, I sandwiched between two washers on a bolt, and when I tighten this it expands the plug, and I've done that so that there's a nice interference fit in the middle of the cartridge of the case, which I can put that in the pillar drill, and with a file I can carefully remove a bit of material and polish it up. So that's what I'm going to do. No special tools needed. So there we go. This is now extremely hot, hence why I didn't put the primer in then. Let's see if it chambers. Try not to put a dent in the ceiling either. It's a bit awkward because I don't have a bullet in there. So, in it goes. Lovely. Ejects. Perfect. So now we come to the bullet part, and this is as close as I could get to the original profile. It's a 550 grain lump of lead with a sort of frostoconical cavity, and if I was using a full-sized 16 gauge case, this would just fit in snugly and it'll be perfect. However, because I'm only using the bottom fifth or so, or even less, of the case, that's where the case wall is probably about double the thickness of the mouth, and it don't fit. So the solution, well, the only solution available to me is to somehow reduce the diameter of the bottom band here. I could grind it away and then shower atomized lead all over the workshop, which would be a bad thing. And then inspiration came to me in the form of this old pencil sharpener that was laying in the workshop. I thought, could I? That would be ideal. So I got a cut-off bit of the case, waste not, want not, and in that I just cut an L-shaped slot and bent up the tab, and this serves as a spring to keep the bullet in place. And then just with pliers I just bent down this ridge here to act as a scraper and a blade, if you like, and this is just to have a handhold. And once again I needed to hold the bullet. This time it's even more critical to hold the bullet because it's soft lead, without damaging it. So I once again returned to my trusty piece of doorstop, this time the bottom slice, and coincidence once again, this hole that I punched out to make the case holding plug holds the nose of the bullet very snugly indeed, which serves two purposes. One, allows me to turn the case, the bullet inside the cutter, and it also acts as a stop so I don't start cutting into the nose of the bullet. So let me put some gloves on. Strictly need it for the holding hand, but better. And see if I can show you how this works. I'm going to wiggle it in, and then you just turn, and you can see there it's starting to shave lead off. And basically you just do this, take it in and out, and again to see how you're doing until you've got the right diameter, so you can just seat it with your finger pressure and you're good to go. So I shall see you when this is done. That should just about do it. Give it a little trial run. Yep. Perfect. So all that remains to do now is load up the cartridge, seat the bullet, grease it, and eventually fire it. So here we are at the final step. I'll put these, load these behemoths in. Now these are 550 grains instead of the original 600, and since these are now short, I can only physically put 65 grains in this, level with the top. So the original load was 70 grains, so it's not that far short, and it's a ever so slightly shorter bullet. Now this will of course mean that some of the powder will be going into the base. And since these are so short and stubby, I'm just going to fill them as one would season a steak. This is 1.5 F, so just fill them up. The level, I can just do with a pinch more. There we go. Grab a bullet. This over. And there we have it. Now I'll lube the groove when I actually head to the range. No point doing it now because they're all going to get all sticky. So here we are at the end of the process. You've seen it all from A to Z. I didn't hide any processes, and as you can see, it's fairly simple. I think probably the only tool that you'd probably really need out of all that is the pillar drill, and that's just so that you can have repeatability and you can have a nice perpendicular bore relative to the cartridge base. And this method can be applied, as I said at the beginning, to pretty much any cartridge, as long as there's space in the base for that little 6mm blank. When I actually get to fire this, I will also take the smaller version, so the 10.4mm, which uses a case with the same trick. So we'll do that when I do a separate episode on the actual Milbank-Amsler system as such. Right, in any case, that's the end of this episode here in the workshop. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it has been of some use and perhaps inspiration. And I'll see you next time. Bye!